What's up guys, it's Branden Flash. Today you're joining me at a version 3 Tesla Supercharger with my 2023 Tesla Model Y all-wheel drive with the 4680 structural battery pack. And we're going to be doing a 0 to 100 DC fast charging charge curve analysis to see how well this Model Y with the battery day, much hyped 4680 battery cells actually charges in the real world. So as I mentioned, this is my 2023 Tesla Model Y all-wheel drive. That's the full name of this trim level. It's the base Model Y sold in the US market. The rest of the world actually gets a base Model Y with LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, which I wish we got here in the US, but that's a topic for another day. But anyway, this is the Model Y that's built in Austin, Texas at the Gigafactory there. It uses the brand new 4680 kind of bigger cell NCM, not LFP batteries, and it's actually going to be part of a structural battery pack. So there's a big hole in the bottom of the vehicle that the battery then goes in, and the seats and everything on the interior, or a lot of the interior anyway, are actually bolted directly to the battery. If you haven't already, Monroe Live has a whole teardown of one of these cars. Definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't. It's pretty wild how this car is constructed. But the purpose of today's test and some of the procedures, we're seeing how well this car charges. Tesla's made a lot of claims, not specifically about this vehicle, but about 4680 battery tech as a whole. And there's a lot of hype surrounding this. And I want to basically do a reality check on this because my experience so far has been that the vehicle doesn't actually charge that well overall. I've had quite a few different electric vehicles, and most of them have charged better than this, unfortunately. So I wanted to collect the data to prove it. And this is actually my second time charging 0 to 100% for two reasons. One, the first recording was not that good of quality. I did it at night and the screen recording was not great. But two, I wanted to be 100% sure of the data. So I am going to be doing this 0 to 100% as I mentioned. I'm running a CAN server with an iPad app called Teslax. So we're actually getting all the CAN data as well, including battery temperatures, voltages, target temperatures, all that fun stuff. So we have all the nerdy data. We're also recording the screen, so we're doing those at once. I'm then overlaying a timer from the very beginning, from the moment it starts charging, and then speeding it up for you guys. So that way you're not having to watch it for a long time. I'm not gonna tell you the full time quite yet. You're gonna have to watch the video to find that out. But anyway, I preconditioned on my way here, so the battery is up to temperature. It started at approximately 40 degrees Celsius. One of the sessions started slightly warmer than the other. And then we simply plug in and let the car do its thing, charge all the way up to 100% until it finishes charging. And at this session during the day, I actually wrapped a wet rag around the charge handle because if the charge handle gets too hot, that can be a limiting factor as well. I don't believe it was on the first charging session either, but just wanted to eliminate one more variable there. So without further ado, we're going to go to future Branden and we're going to analyze the first charging session, which I recorded at night. It was about 75 degrees, if I remember correctly. No sun, of course, and we did a 0 to 100. On this one, you'll see that it takes a decent while at 100%, so there was some top balancing. So maybe disregard that bit of the recording. However, the rest is totally valid. And then after that, we'll skip to this recording that I'm doing right now. And we'll kind of compare the two. I'll also pull the data, put together some charts for you guys for us to look at the end. So without further ado, let's skip to future Branden. And you're joining future Branden back at home. We've got the videos loaded up. I have the timescale and everything all set up for you guys. So first we're going to start with talking about my Teslax setup, which is the iPad that I have running that will show you all the nerdy CAN bus details. So I've put a screenshot, so I'm going to put that up now. And we're going to start at the top row, and then we're just going to work our way down. I want to explain all the different signals that are in there and kind of what they mean. So top left, state of charge, pretty obvious. However, that state of charge will not necessarily match the state of charge that's shown on the car screen, because this is the actual battery state of charge, not the displayed state of charge. So those are two different values. So this is essentially the raw state of charge of the vehicle or of the battery itself. Then we have UI speed, so that's vehicle speed in miles per hour, pretty obvious. We have HV battery voltage, so that is the high voltage battery voltage. So that's the main big battery and voltage that are set. We have HV battery current next to that. So if this is a positive value, it's pulling current out of the battery, and if it's a negative value, it's charging. So on these charge sessions, you're going to see these values as negative, but at the very, very beginning, you'll see them as positive values just as it's starting to charge. Moving on to the next row, so we have front motor power, front motor torque. Again, pretty self-explanatory. And then next to that, we have the same for the rear motor. We're not going to be looking at those in this case for charging analyzing because the vehicle's not moving. There's no power going to the motors. Going to the third row, we have battery power. So negative value means it's charging. So that's what we're going to see most of the time. And positive value means that it's pulling battery out of the vehicle, and that's just in kilowatts. So that's how much power it's charging at. Into the battery, not into the vehicle necessarily, just to clarify. So that's the amount of power actually going into the battery. So not what's flowing through the charge port, which may be a higher number, depending on how much power is going to HVAC and things like that. Next, we have max regen power. So that is the maximum available regen power. If you were driving and you were to lift off the accelerator pedal fully, that's how much regenerative braking you'd get in kilowatts. Next, we have battery coolant temperature. So that's the actual inlet temperature of the coolant that's going into the battery. So kind of right before it gets into the battery, what's the temperature of that coolant in Celsius? We have degrees steering angle. Again, not really relevant for this. That's just the angle or the number of degrees that the steering wheel is offset from dead center straight. Moving on to row 4. So we have minimum battery brick temperature. So pretty self-explanatory, but that's the temperature of the coolest brick in the battery in Celsius. And then we have next to that max battery brick temperature. So that's the temperature of the maximum brick temperature of the battery brick, if that made sense. And with the minimum and maximum, you want to look at the differential there, and that's how you can kind of tell if there's a temperature gradient. But that doesn't necessarily tell you the full story because there's only so many sensors in the battery pack, and they're not necessarily getting temperatures from everywhere. So these are just based on sensor values. Next, we have the battery cool target. So that's the temperature that the vehicle is aiming to cool the battery to. And if this value is higher than the maximum battery brick temperature or of the minimum battery brick temperature, then it's not actively trying to cool. Same thing for battery heat target next. So if that value is higher than the current battery temperature, then that is indicating that the battery is trying to actively heat. If that's cooler than the battery temperature, then it's not actively trying to heat. And those kind of go hand in hand with battery coolant temperature. So if it's actively heating, the battery coolant temperature will be higher than the max brick temperature. And if it's actively cooling, then it will be lower than the battery brick temperature. So that kind of tells you the thermal strategy that's going on there and kind of what you're looking for. BMS inlet passive target, I haven't fully figured out that value yet. My understanding, just looking at the values and how it works, is that it seems to be a few degrees below the cooling target, but I'm not 100% sure what that value is. I believe it's just the passive cooling target, so rather than actively cooling it. Next, we have battery remaining kilowatt hours. So that's just the raw energy that the vehicle is estimating is remaining in the battery, and that includes the buffer. So this can actually go into the buffer. Next, we have battery full kilowatt hours. So that's just kind of a constant value or fluctuates a little bit depending on the battery calibration. So that's the vehicle's estimated kilowatt hours remaining when the battery is at 100%. Next is battery buffer kilowatt hours. So that's just telling you how large the buffer is, but that's just a static value. That's telling you how much of the battery is reserved for the buffer, not how much of the buffer is currently available. Moving on below, I have the state of charge again, same as that very first value. Just have that there in case I want to crop things at all. We have minimum battery brick voltage. So that's the minimum brick or the lowest brick voltage in the pack. And the value you're kind of looking for there is 4.2 is a fully charged lithium ion battery cell. And then next to that, we have max battery brick voltage. So same thing, just max. UI request active battery heating. So if that's a 1, it seems to be heating. And if that's a 0, it seems to not be heating from what I've seen. So I ended up actually covering that in the second one just with the timer, but I don't think that value matters a whole lot, so I would not look at that too much. All right, and let's switch to going into that first recording. This was done at night. It was about 90 degrees outside. There was no sun, of course, because it was night. Battery had been driven down to 0% because I did the 10% challenge that I posted over on Out of Spec Studios or Out of Spec Reviews. So it had been driven quite a bit. Battery was pre-conditioned. It did start out relatively warm at about 48 degrees battery max brick temp, which is a little bit warmer than it would normally be. But you'll see in the next test it actually starts out a little bit cooler, but just wanted to add that note. But I ran battery preconditioning, so it should have been, however the vehicle wanted it, it should have gone to that point. Top left, you'll see the vehicle charging information. Apologies that it's fairly blurry. I was hoping that doing this at night would make it turn out better. Turns out it made it turn out worse. But you have the clock running, so that is for real time, and we have that in hours, minutes, seconds, frames. So you're definitely gonna see that chug along pretty darn quickly. So without further ado, let's jump into the actual recording. And here we go. So we jump right in. It jumps right up to about 670 amps. It drops very quickly, as you can tell. We peaked about 223 kilowatts. Model Y 4680 is rated at 230 kilowatts. We can see here we're at 16%. We're already below 120 kilowatts. So really not showing much benefit for a version 3 supercharger. You're just going to drop so aggressively. We're up to 23 or 20% state of charge displayed. Battery is already toasty. It's up to 57 degrees Celsius. Battery is trying to cool. It's at 45 degrees inlet temp, but doesn't seem to be being that effective. So it might be a thermal issue here, that it's just heating up too much. But I think if Tesla really cranked up the cooling earlier, maybe started with a cooler battery to begin with, it would allow it to charge deeper. We are viewing this at 15x speed. So definitely moving a lot quicker than in reality. You can also see the pack voltage is fairly low. So we started out about 330, I believe, and we're only at about 357 now at about 40% state of charge. I would hope that this would ramp up quite a bit more. But definitely on lower current chargers, you're not going to get a whole lot of power out of them. So like EVgo, things like that have 200 amp cables on a lot of chargers, or ChargePoint CP250s. Those are both kind of notorious for low cable current ratings. You're not going to get a whole lot of power. You definitely need all the current you can get with this vehicle. But brick temps or brick voltages are starting to come up. They're at 4 volts, so getting close to the 4.2 max, but not quite there. And battery is still cooling. You can still see the cool target, but that's actually rising quite a bit as we go up in state of charge. But overall, you can just see how aggressively this tapers, and that it's actually a really poor charging curve. This is arguably almost as bad as my old Model S 70D, which was really a bad charging curve. I think Tesla really should be actually pretty ashamed of what they've done with this charging curve. It's kind of insulting to Model Y buyers that are expecting the Tesla experience that they should be able to get in 2023, because every other Tesla on the market delivers it. The Model 3 with the rear-wheel drive and LFP, the lithium iron phosphate battery, that actually charges really well. It's cheaper, it has a smaller battery, and it's more efficient. So that's actually the better road trip car, surprisingly. But here we're getting up to about 75% almost in 40 minutes, which is really, really bad. It's just crazy to me that this is actually from Tesla in 2023 when they've been doing this for so long. I don't know how this made it through quality assurance and things like that. So we're just about at 80%, 79, about to tick over. So there's 80% displayed in 43 minutes and change, which is really bad. There's quite a few legs across the country, actually, that you may have to charge to 80% in this car because it doesn't have the most range. And you're going to be there for 40 minutes, which you should not have to do in 2023 in a brand new Tesla. That is just simply unexcusable to me. Battery pack temp still holding pretty warm at about 58 degrees Celsius, but it's not trying to actively cool anymore, which is pretty interesting to me. Not sure why it's doing that. You do want the battery warmer as it's getting into higher state of charge when you're DC charging, But also you would think that it would be more aggressively charging if that was the case. So here we are, this battery has a 90% ledge. It dropped down from about 50 kilowatts that it holds until about 90%, which is actually not terrible. If only it would hold higher and then taper to 50 at 90%, then that would actually be pretty good. But here we are, we're under 20 kilowatts at 90%. I would say you should never charge above 90% on this battery unless you just have time to waste or you're doing something else or whatever. But there's no reason from a practical perspective and time efficiency perspective that you should be charging over 95% or over 90%. And these last few percentages are just crazy slow. So we're now at 65 minutes charging. So over an hour, we're at about 96% displayed state of charge. And it's just going to keep going. We're at level 2 speeds now. This vehicle actually charges at 48 amps on AC level 2, which is about 11 kilowatts. And we're now below that. So I haven't obviously recorded an AC charging curve, but I suspect the same thing would happen if you're charging at home on an 11 kilowatt, 48 amp AC EVSE. And that's just wild to me that it would taper this aggressively, but it is apparently doing some top balancing, it seems. So not abnormal if you haven't charged to 100% super recently. And it had been probably 30 charge, well, maybe not 30 charge cycles, but about 30 charge sessions since I had last charged to 100%. So it does kind of make sense that it would want to top balance again. But we're just chugging along here. We're almost at an hour and 20 minutes, 80 minutes total, which is really just truly terrible. So 99%, and it's just top balancing. I think my general standard for charging is that it should be 0 to 100 in 1 hour on pretty much any modern EV. And most do deliver that actually, except for this. And we're going to see the next recording shortly, and that's even worse somehow. So that's this. We did click over to charge completed about an hour and 25 minutes. Truly terrible. So the second recording I actually did at a different supercharger. So the first one I did at the Charlotte Providence Road version 3 supercharger, and the second one I did at the Fort Mill, South Carolina, still general Charlotte area version 3 supercharger. The second one I did during the day. Battery was also preconditioned. I had been driving it a decent amount prior, and on this one I actually used the wet rag trick. So that seemed to have changed the curve a little bit, or I'm not entirely sure if it was the wet rag trick or not. But I did that just to remove a variable, given that this one was recorded during the day. But let's jump right in. And you can see we jumped right up to 635 amps, pretty much maxing out the supercharger. A little bit less than we hit on the other one, but we did get over 200 or about 220 kilowatts max. And again, very, very aggressive ramp down. If you've watched some other YouTube videos about modern Teslas, like Kyle Connor's videos on out of spec, you'll know that most new Teslas, they actually don't fully ramp up until they get to about 10% state of charge. Whereas this is hitting full power right away at 0%, which is super weird. I'm not really sure why Tesla's doing this on a more experimental battery pack than they are on their more proven battery packs, unless they've just figured something out on those other ones, but not yet on this. But you can see here, we're at 30%. We're already at about 80 kilowatts, which is just crazy low. Very pathetically bad. But we are at about 35% after 12 minutes, which is not terrible, but really not great either. Let's see what we get to, or how long it takes to get to 50% or even 60, 70%. But you can see here, 40%, we're at 65 kilowatts. That's about the same as my old Model S70D that had a effective battery pack of about 58 kilowatt hours. This is about 68 kilowatt hours in 2023, 8 years later than that Model S70D. Tesla really has to do better than this. So still holding about 60 kilowatts, which is, I'm glad to see that it's holding pretty flat, but it's holding flat at a very low value. We're at just about 50%, a little over 22 minutes. Pretty bad. That's just, it's not good. We'd be fully charged right now in an eGMP like a Kia EV6, Hyundai Ioniq 5. We'd be at 90+% roughly, as long as you had a charger that was working. But just really not an acceptable charging curve on a brand new car. We're at 60% in about 28 minutes. So we're coming up on 30 minutes here. Let's see what we're at. So 30 minutes, 62%. That is really quite bad. Battery pack, it's holding at about 57 degrees Celsius max brick temp. So that seems to be about where it wants to max out. I'd be really curious to check out this charging curve in a cold environment. It's of course pretty toasty out. It's summer. Unless someone has a thermal chamber with a supercharger in it that they want me to use, we're gonna have to wait till winter to check with cold charging performance. But we're at about 50 kilowatts right now, plus or minus, and we're just gonna hold that pretty much flat now until we get to 90%. That's the pretty typical charge curve. So it does flatten out quite a bit, but I just wish it would flatten out at a much higher value than 50 kilowatts because it's just not enough. We're at 125 amps, hardly anything. Like there's very little power coming out of the supercharger into this car at this point. Obviously 50 kilowatts is not that little, but in the grand scheme of things, it is just not competitive at all. So I really don't know what Tesla is doing. These cars have been out for about a year now with the 4680 battery pack. They've had plenty of internal Tesla or test vehicles in their fleet. You'd think that they would have all the data they would need to really let this rip, unless there's just some fatal flaw on these that they simply can't. And if that's the case, they really need to go back to the drawing board, and they shouldn't have brought it to be an actual vehicle available for normal people to buy versus just kind of an off the menu, low volume employee special kind of vehicle. So here we are, 90%. We're at about 30 kilowatts. It ramped down fairly slowly there. On this session, I accidentally had the charging limit set to 90%. So the second I realized that, I hit start charge again. So it was only stopped for about a second, but you'll see that here. And this session was actually crazy. So we're only halfway through this recording, and it's just going to go so slow all the way up to 100%. It took almost as long to go from 90 to 100%, actually maybe even longer, than it did to go from 0 to 90%, which I know people always say that it takes as long to go from 80 to 100% as it does to go to from 0 to 80, but this just takes it to a whole new level. It is crazy slow up top. And you would never want to charge this to 100% on a fast charger if you can avoid it. And realistically, the difference between if you charge up to 95% and 100% is not the make or break, or if it is, you should just drive slower because it's that ineffective to keep charging above 95% or really even above 90% on this car. But here you can see battery cooling target is 60 degrees. It's also not heating, so it seems to be totally happy with this 56.5 degrees Celsius max brick temperature. I would think that it would want to cool it unless there's just that much resistance if it lets it cool down at this high state of charge. But I mean, I'm not a battery engineer. I don't 100% know, but this is just, it's so slow up top. And I don't know if there's just huge buffers that they're hiding beyond the 3.1 kilowatt hour, because it kind of seems that way. So if you look at the max regen value, it's still at over 70 kilowatts max regen at 98% state of charge, and it's just very slowly trickling down, even though it's only charging at 5 kilowatts to the battery. So I did have the AC running this entire time, so that's what that difference is between what's shown on the vehicle screen of 11 kilowatts and what's shown on the battery power of 4.4. But that should not be the make or break there as it's charging up, because there's more power than is necessary available. So it should be able to just stop charging whenever it feels like it. But you can see we're down to 9 kilowatts at 98%. It's showing 1 minute to charge limit. You're going to see this is not even close to 1 minute away from charge limit. We've crossed 1 minute there. It's just going to keep showing 1 minute just to leave you astray. I really don't know how Tesla managed to mess this up so much. I would have thought that in prototyping and things like that they would have found problems like this and not shipped a vehicle in 2023 that has this poor of charging performance, especially when there's competitors like the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, Rivian, Mercedes, all these other vehicles that just charge much more aggressively than Tesla does. And a lot of people don't realize that Teslas actually have one of the most conservative charging curves on the market. They just have a ubiquitous charging network that kind of makes up for it on most of the models, but their charging curve and range are generally not very good compared to competitors at this point. They were fine 5 years ago or even 4 years ago, but they're just not where they need to be at this point. And it's really unfortunate because Tesla has the smart people that they could make this a whole lot better if they wanted to. They just seemingly are not. So we're coming up on nearly 2 hours now, going 0 to 100%, that's crazy. That would have been crazy in 2015, let alone in 2023. And it's calculating, so it's doing some top balancing. It's at 4.2 volts, and we're less than 1 kilowatt in, and now we're finished. So crazy. Well, now that you guys have seen the charge recordings, we've gone through them. You've seen how quickly it drops, how very incredibly briefly it peaks out at peak. I don't even think it's fair to say that the Model Y base charges at 230 kilowatts max. I mean, I've never seen 230 kilowatts max. Highest I've seen is 223 kilowatts. But it just does it so briefly. I don't even think that counts. That's just silly. That's like just to bring up pack voltage, and then it immediately drops. So I did pull some charts here from TeslaMate because that has a little bit higher polling frequency than TeslaFi and some of the other services. So first, we'll look at the first charging session from 8/14, and that's on the latest software 2023.26.7. So you can see that very brief high peak drops fairly linearly, and then it actually has a little bit of a dip of a curve. So I suspect that might be the cooling trying to catch up, just how it kind of dips, curves, and then kind of flattens out a little bit. And then you'll see kind of that 90% more aggressive drop off, but it's fairly flat until 80%. So that's that graph. We'll then look at the graph for the second charging session from today. So that one, again, very similar, but actually seems to hold that initial curve a little bit. So I think that could have been due to the charging handle temperature on the first session, limiting the session a bit, but it's hard to say with 100% certainty. But the initial power was held very slightly longer on this second session, but the rest of the curve is nearly identical. And then we actually have a bonus session in here that I don't have video of, but I do have data of. So down below, I've actually linked a Google document with 3 different tabs of these 3 different charging sessions with logs from TeslaMate. So that way you can check those out. But here's that third session in graph form. And this was on a different software version, so that could be a factor as well. And this seems to be pretty flat, well, not flat, but a little bit less pronounced of a drop initially. I believe the temperatures were a bit cooler when I did this, if I remember correctly. But again, it's close enough that it's not the make or break here. And all 3 charging sessions are very similar that I think this data is solid. And I think it's just so critical that Tesla makes this charging curve better, because otherwise this is going to stop people from buying this car. And frankly, I cannot recommend the base Model Y at this point with this charging curve if you plan to take any road trips. It is that bad. It's workable, and like someone like me can tolerate it, but I shouldn't have to. It should just be much better. And this shouldn't even be a concern for someone buying a brand new Tesla in 2023. I thought we were past this point with Tesla of just having terrible charging curves. And I knew they're not super aggressive, but they should at least be adequate up to like 50-60% that you can be on your way in 10-15 minutes. And you can on most of the newer long range cars. And even the new Model S and X, they have a pretty decent charging curve. It's not anything worth bragging about. It's not industry leading, but it's solid. Whereas this is just downright bad. You can buy a base model Ioniq 5 or EV6 and it's better than this. It'll hold basically 180 kilowatts flat. Or on the long range EV6 or Ioniq 5, those will hold 200 plus kilowatts, basically flat the entire charging curve, and then drops at like 70-80%. And yes, they are picky on temperature and things, but Tesla could do that too. And Tesla could manage that temperature probably better than anyone else. You also look at vehicles like the Porsche Taycan, it can do 270 kilowatts, basically flat. Even the small battery, I believe that maxes out at like 220, if I remember correctly. It's been a little while, but the small battery is around 80 kilowatts or kilowatt hour. And that has a much more aggressive charging curve too. And I realize this is only a 60 kilowatt hour battery, so it can't do anything too crazy, but this is completely unacceptable. So I hope some people from Tesla are watching this video. If you are, feel free to pull logs, feel free to reach out, ask any questions you have. You can reach out, LinkedIn, email, text me, whatever, like pull up my customer account. I don't care. You have all access to my vehicle data if it means that you're going to help improve this. So You can search my name on LinkedIn if you want to reach out that way. That way you can prove who you are if you want to. But anyway, if you have a Model Y all-wheel drive 4680 and you've had pretty similar experiences, definitely comment down below. If this was helpful, hit the like button. If you're in the market for a new Tesla, if you're looking for something more budget conscious, I recommend the Model 3 rear-wheel drive with the LFP battery. That actually charges extremely well. It's a smaller battery, but the charging on that car just rocks. I did a charge curve analysis on that with some recordings I did when I rented one. I could not be happier with that, and I really wish that Tesla would just sell the LFP battery in the Model Y in the US, because that's so much better. But and if you need a Model Y, get the long range. Don't get the base model. Frankly, if I didn't make YouTube content and if I hadn't wrapped it, I would probably be looking at trading it in for a long range. This charge curve is that bad. And I really did realize that kind of on these more recent trips. Because on a long road trip, you have so many other things going on. But when you're doing a short kind of weekend trip like I did to Nashville, that's when you feel the length of the charging sessions a bit more, because you're not doing a long day that you really just actually want to stretch your legs. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you on the next one.